Hello guys, and welcome back to another episode. Now, in today's video, we're diving into the history of one of the, the longest wave in the world. So without further ado, let's dive in. Our story begins in 1965 when Hawaiian professional surfer Chuck Shipman was flying to and from Peru to compete in contests down in Lima. He'd flown this route a handful of times, and during these flights, most of the time the coast of Peru is shrouded in mist and fog and you can't really see much. But for whatever reason, on this particular flight, he gazed out the window and below him he spotted what looked like one of the most perfect waves he'd ever seen. Just an endless, stupidly long left-hand point. So he tried to line up where he was in the air in relation to the map and tried to figure out where this wave might actually be. There were few coastal towns in the area, and much of the coastline was barren and unnamed on the map. The closest place he could see to where the wave might be was a place called Chicama Valley, a few miles to the south of where the wave actually was, or where he thought it was. During the contest in Lima, Shipman found himself fascinated by the Peruvian culture, and he quickly befriended some of the local Peruvian professional surfers. And while competing and surfing the breaks around Lima, naturally their conversations began to drift into the potential for surf in Peru, which at that point was unlimited. And in 1966, rumors of this spectacularly long wave that Chuck had seen from the air began to circulate around surfing circles. During that year, there were actually 3 expeditions to go and find this mystical wave. Unfortunately though, all 3 of them were unsuccessful, and the parties that went out to find the wave came back empty-handed. So no one could find the break, and back then it was a really difficult place to find. I mean, if you've been there, you'll know that it's pretty difficult to find now, even when it's well known and, you know, a famous destination. But then came Carlos Flaco Barleda, and Carlos was one of the surfers that Chuck had befriended during the contest down in Lima. Carlos and Chuck had discussed the potential for this wave, and they plotted on the map to where they thought it might be. And they estimated the wave was located somewhere between Chimbote to the south and Chiclayo to the north. So Carlos took it upon himself to find the wave. He assembled a crew of friends who all surfed, and luckily one of them owned a brand new VW Beetle, which was just as well because they needed a sturdy vehicle to get down these dirt tracks and actually find the break. The group he assembled consisted of other legendary Peruvian surfers, some of which had already pioneered some of the other famous breaks around the country. So going off around the Peruvian coastline and finding new waves was nothing new to the crew. But what they were looking for this time was something infinitely more special. So with 2 cars, all their provisions and surf equipment, the crew headed north from Lima in search of this potentially magical wave. They drove and drove and drove. If you've been to Peru, you'll know how big and vast the country is, so distances between the major towns are massive. And back then, with the cars that they had and the road quality being poorer than it is now, must have been a hell of a journey. They camped and surfed their way up the coast, and the trip had all the ingredients of an epic surf trip, you know, camping, sleeping on the beach, making fires, surfing fun waves. But despite this, they hadn't quite found the aquatic banquet they were looking for. At one point, they kept driving down a promising looking dirt track. They thought this was in the rough area of where the wave might be, and they motored down the track full of hope and anticipation at what this wave could look like. You know, in their heads they had something so long and magical that was unrivaled anywhere else in Peru, if not the world. And where they arrived to, despite it having a fun little left-hand point break, the waves were tiny and very disappointing compared to what they had in their minds. And so disappointed, they continued north. But then at one stage it suddenly dawned on them with horror that the wave that Chuck might have been describing to them was an already well-known surf break breaking near the town of Trujillo in Huanchaco. Now, while Huanchaco wasn't a world-class wave, a really fun left-hand point, it was already well known and established in Peru, and it had been discovered years before. But with this in mind, and still clinging on to the hope that they might find something better, they continued north, past Trujillo, and eventually into the town of Paihan. Now, Paihan, if you haven't been there, is the sort of the gateway to Chicama. And back then it was a tiny little town. I mean, it still is now. They asked around the locals as to where this mystical place might be, and eventually one of the locals pointed them in the right direction. So now, with an inkling that they might finally be in the right place, they turned out of Paihan and followed a dusty old dirt track towards the ocean. After around half an hour, they reached a small fishing village called Puerto Malabrigo. After driving through town and with anticipation and excitement now skyrocketing, the crew of 6 stopped and stared at the ocean as before them they saw the water ribbed with lines all the way out into the horizon, where perfect 6-foot lefts peeled from as far as they could see in the distance, all the way along the headland and down towards the pier in town. They stood there without speaking, jaws to the floor, just stunned into silence. For a few moments, no one spoke until suddenly hoots and hollers filled the air as they watched waves just reel off and reel off down the point. And it was in that moment they realised they discovered their dream wave. So before watching on in disbelief for a few moments, suddenly the crew were waxing up, throwing leashes on and running up the point to get a first taste of Chicama. It was perfect, it was empty, it was long, and it was everything the crew had dreamed of. They surfed some stupidly long waves that day, and one of them had actually taken a camera with them, so one of them stayed back and actually documented a few of the first waves ever ridden at Chicama. Unfortunately, because the wave was so long, the film they were using could only film for so long, and it actually missed a lot of the waves. So they actually couldn't film from start to finish, so it only shows a few segments of the wave. And it's actually a common misconception that when Carlos and the rest of the crew first surfed Chicama, it was really, really small. But as Carlos himself documents, this wasn't actually the case, and the waves were actually pumping that day. They surfed all day, and they stayed in town for a few days as the swell backed off, just surfing, camping, and having, I guess, the best freaking time ever. I mean, this story is so cool. I mean, imagine having that experience, discovering a wave that long where it's just a few of you and your mates. Must be the best flipping feeling ever. Eventually they headed back to Lima, and back in Lima their tales of this incredible wave were at first met with skepticism and accusations of exaggeration. But that soon changed when the film got developed a few weeks later, and the pictures didn't lie, and they could show their friends the true potential of this wave. And as is the natural order of most world-class wave discoveries, word got out, and surfers from around Peru and eventually from around the world began flocking to Chicama, and the rest is history. It became the world-renowned, famous, world's longest left or world's longest wave that it is today. So today, the waves are very much the same as they always have been in Chicama. The wave is tremendously long, with multiple sections. I mean, they don't actually all join up. There's actually multiple sections to the point, and they're all fun waves in their own right. But the real sort of jewel in the crown of that whole stretch is El Point, or First Point. And that wave is stupidly long. I mean, in that section alone, when there's a bit of swell, you can ride waves for like 2 minutes plus. It's honestly ridiculous. It's the only wave I've surfed where you have to basically take a break actually on the wave. So you take off, get really excited, start hitting off a few turns, and then you basically just have to wait for your lungs and your legs to catch up with you again. So you have to kind of just stand there and cruise along for a moment, and then when you've caught your breath again, you can start going. It's not necessarily like a freight train barrel the whole way. It does kind of have little barrel sections, but it's mostly a bit more of a fatter wave where you can just hit the lip and do carves, and some sections are fast, some slow up, so it just changes as it bends down the point. But yeah, it's a really, really fun wave. So when I was there, I ended up just doing these like huge runarounds. I mean, a lot of people get the boat, which for like $30 you can basically get a lift after every ride. Because I was on such a tight budget, I was just doing these huge runarounds. I ride a wave basically all the way back to town, and then just, I say runarounds, they're more walkarounds, and then walk all the way back up, jump in. And because the rip's so strong there, you can't really sit in the water, you just get taken down with the current. So you basically got to keep paddling the whole time you're in the lineup. If not, you'll just drift down. So you need to like either jump off the boat or paddle out and catch a wave straight away. So although it is crowded and there's like always a lot of people surfing if it's good, the crowd doesn't feel like a problem, obviously, because it's such a huge playing field anyway, and because the rip is like dragging you down the whole time, the lineup's just sort of flowing around like that. It's not like, you know, a spot where it's all condensed and everyone's sat in the one spot. Like, no one can really stay in the same spot. The one thing that is pretty annoying in Chicama is the boats. So because most people, I'd say sort of like 70 to 80% of surfers out there are getting lifts, the boats drive really close to the wave, so it makes all this boat wake run through the lineup. And if that happens at the same time of a set and a set that you're on, it's super annoying, because you get this really big long wall and you take off and you've got all this boat wake running through it. It kind of fucks it up a bit. And then Chicama town itself, I mean, back in the 60s when it was discovered, I'd love to have seen what it was like then, because now there's still not really much going on. You know, it's a pretty small, sleepy little place. There's not really anything else to do apart from go surfing, which is really cool because that's why you go. That said, there's a few little restaurants in town. There's one or two little hostels, cheap rooms. There's actually some nice, like, more boutique hostels there as well, and like some nice resorts where you can stay in a room like overlooking the point. It's really nice. So yeah, really cool little place. It's kind of bleak, like it doesn't look that picturesque unless you're looking at the ocean, and then it's very picturesque. So yeah, there's loads of like affordable places. I stayed at a place called Hospedaje La Ola Azul, and then it was like $22 a night when I stayed there. I think it's a little bit more now. There's been a bit of inflation since then, but pretty nice little room, just like a 2-minute walk away from where you can see the waves. Then obviously you've got to like walk out to the point. So that's the other really cool thing about Chicama. The wave is actually protected under Peruvian law, so no development can happen within 1 kilometer of the wave. So it's really cool that the Peruvian government have taken that initiative, knowing that they've got this amazing natural resource in the form of a wave, and they actually want to protect it. There are actually 43 other waves as well throughout Peru that are protected under this same law. So it's quite cool to see a country that is actually looking after its world-class waves. I know there's a lot of other countries that could take note of this. So yeah, that is a history and an insight into Chicama. It's an amazing wave. If you haven't already, check out my video of when I went there for the first time. Got it really good. I hope you've enjoyed this video. I love making these like sort of historical insights into different breaks. Let me know if you want to see more of them and what places you want to see broken down. For now, it's goodbye from me. Please like and subscribe as always, and I'll see you in the next ep.